This is Edna Ko, a professor of public administration from the University of the Philippines and director of the UP CIFAL Philippines. CIFAL Philippines is an affiliated center of the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. Welcome, everyone. I will try to open and welcome everyone by first of all acknowledging and thanking people who are behind the production of this webinar. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Dexter Galban, Commissioner of the Commission on Population and Development, for agreeing to serve as moderator for our forum this afternoon. And of course, I have to thank so immensely our partner institutions and agencies in the promotion of this webinar on the young in the face of COVID-19 impacts on children and youth's well-being and safety. And the following are our partners: 2030 Youth Force Philippines, Ayala Foundation, thank you, Online SDG Youth Action Forum, the Philippine Youth Network, the Ramon Aboitiz Foundation, the Sangguniang Kabataan of Cebu City. Thank you so much. Sangguniang Kabataan of Quezon City, the Stairway Foundation, the Student Council Alliance of the Philippines, the UP Family Life and Child Development of my own university, the Youth Advocates for the Philippines. Thank you so much. I also, of course, wish to thank the panel of experts and speakers that we have this afternoon. I will not mention their names because the moderator will introduce them at the proper time. I'd like to welcome as well our 654 registrants to this webinar from all over the world, from the USA, from the United Arab Emirates, from China, Nepal, Israel, Pakistan, Indonesia, Thailand, and the different sectors and participants to this webinar, which includes ABS-CBN Foundation, the Global Institute for Youth Development, SOS Children's Village, Bukas Puso at Isip Family Support Group of the UP Philippine General Hospital, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Medicine, the Junior Social Workers Association, Talikala Incorporated, Iloilo Children Welfare Foundation, Psychological Association of the Philippines, the Philippines Guidance and Counseling Association, the Archdiocese Commission on Youth, Archdiocese of Manila, and government institutions such as the Department of Education, academia, students and faculty of different universities, DLSU, UANP, Claret School, University of the East, West Visayas State University, Philippine Science High School, Holy Angel University, the Canadian American School, and the Woodrow School, among many others. Thank you so much for your wonderful welcoming and support for this webinar. Now, let me come to why we convene this particular webinar. As we know, we have been already on the going on the fourth month of our COVID-19 quarantine. If we see the focus of the quarantine, it touches very strongly on young people, on children, and in the case of the Philippines, those below the age of 21. If you look at young and the definition of the youth, 15 to 30 years of age, according to the Youth in Nation Building Act of the Philippines, in this webinar, we go beyond the youth, which is age 15 to 30, we include even children, those who are younger than 15. Youth policy in many of our official documents usually talk of education, of health and welfare, of income and expenditures, of leisure, of youth participation and volunteerism. But under a special circumstance such as the coronavirus 19 pandemic, there has been, which is a pivotal bringer to the lives of our young people and the children, we have been experiencing dramatic disruption of our lives. There is disruption of schools, of routine health services, of routine and the usual community level centers and activities, the pandemic has indeed changed our lives, and dramatically so. The logistics have changed as well. The lockdown and the quarantine have shut us down, making us lose or feel like we're losing freedoms, making us feel that we are caged in by the pandemic. In other words, all of us at different age levels are affected by the pandemic, but there are special challenges and crises that our children and young people do face, and very daunting challenges, I would say, both in the social, health, economic spheres, and not to exclude fighting the anxiety, the mental health care, the stresses and the challenges of psychosocial crises, and even of domestic violence or gender-based violence. In other words, we ask the difficult questions at this point, to which our expert speakers and resource persons will also be sharing with us, or around these topics. We want to ask the questions: what are the impacts of the pandemic on our children and the young people? And are the young people special creatures to be treated specially or differently? What kind of a special role do our family and the household play in the context of a very homebound and home-based situation at this time of the pandemic? Increasingly, the home is going to be a pretty significant unit in our community. Whether we go back to school or we go back to our normal lives, the home will be the constant guide. And this is where our experts will have to share a lot of things about well-being. Well-being not only physically, but also psychologically and mentally. In this regard, we wish to share with you and to the whole world this conversation, this sharing of ideas, this sharing of experiences on children and youth's well-being and safety in the face of our pandemic right now. So with this, I'd like to welcome all of you and thank all of you once more. Thank you, and we look forward to a very resourceful, our very intelligent and very rich conversation on the topic. Once more, thank you, good afternoon, and have a productive afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Young in the Face of COVID-19, Impacts on Children and Youth's Well-Being and Safety. This is a webinar on the challenges faced by young people amidst the pandemic and the ways to support and protect their well-being and safety as they deal with the crisis and adapt to the new normal. Today, we have some house rules for our webinar, and here they are. For those who will be participating within the Zoom conference platform, we'd like to request that if you have questions, to submit them through our chat panel within the program itself. The speakers can reply to these questions directly on the board or later during the Q&A part of this program. This webinar is currently being recorded to be uploaded later on the CIFAL Facebook page. And of course, presentations will be shared to the email addresses of attendees after the webinar. So to begin, I'd like to inform everyone about the overall goals and learning objectives of this webinar. First, it is to understand how children and youth are affected by the COVID-19 crisis, to identify ways to support and protect young people's well-being and safety during this pandemic, and of course, to explore coping skills and strategies in facing the new normal. And this afternoon, we have an amazing lineup of speakers who will be discussing the overview of the challenges and the impact of COVID-19 to young people, family as a haven for children, being cyber safe in the time of COVID-19, and of course, maintaining mental wellness in the new normal. So to begin, I'd like to call on our first speaker. I'll be introducing her in just a minute. Our first speaker is a graduate of social work from the University of the Philippines. She first worked with the families of political prisoners and children affected by armed conflict. Afterwards, she was involved in various researches and publications on child protection, issues such as child abuse and resilience, psychological effects of armed conflict, and juvenile justice interventions with the Center for Integrative and Development Studies of the University of the Philippines. With the NGO, she helped establish the Psychosocial Support and Children's Rights Resource Center. She has worked with UNICEF since 2013 as part of the response team of the Typhoon Haiyan for 2 years in the Tacloban Field Office. Currently, she is with the Philippine Country Office of as a child protection officer and focal person for UNICEF's efforts to end violence against children. Ladies and gentlemen, to talk about the overview of the challenges and impacts of COVID-19 on young people, I'd like to introduce to you to Ms. Faye Alma Balana. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Dexter. Good afternoon, magandang hapon. I would like to ask first if everybody is seeing the presentation, because I can't. It's a blank, dark screen.
Miss
Hello?
Faye, yes, we can see the presentation. You can still not see.
No, I can't. It's a blank, black screen. But I can follow offline. I have a copy of my presentation offline. So I'll do that. So yes, good
Yes, please. You
afternoon.
can start your
Yeah.
presentation.
Yes, so I'm at the first slide, the cover page. So basically, hello everybody. And next slide, please. When we talk about impact of COVID-19 to young people, I think the best people to answer that would be the children and young people themselves, right? So for UNICEF, we did 3 short surveys. One is with PYDN ING, where it was a short survey online, and most of the young people who shared said that they obviously they feel frustrated, they feel anxious, and they feel fearful because of what's happening around them. One of the things, aside from the obvious reasons why, one of the things that really worries them is that there is a lack of youth-focused services and programs. And they want to help support the government, but they can't find any venue where they can contribute. It contributes to their feeling of helplessness. And if we move to the next slide, UNICEF field office in Mindanao started U-Report. It's a cell phone based and a Facebook based app where it's a way where you can get the pulse of the young people. Several questions are often blasted to them over text, and they reply via text too, and the answers are collated. It's a one way to support participation by airing what they feel, what they think, and what their opinions are on various issues that they face in Mindanao. But for COVID-19, the Field Office of Mindanao opened U-Report to the whole of Philippines. And the questions, of course, when asked about how the pandemic affected them and the quarantine measures that they experienced, is that 31%, of course, felt worried, 29% sad, but 18% still felt calm. And why do they feel that way? 22% of adolescents said that it's due to uncertainty of going back to school. It's still uh, what to do. How sure are they that they will be able to continue their schooling? Um, and then 16%, of course, are concerned about the limited financial resources of the family, as their parents face a number of economic difficulties as jobs were lost. And then those older ones, those who are working, uh, felt uncertain about getting employment. And 58%, the majority of adolescents and youth, observed changes in their moods during the last 2 weeks. From their usual cheerful self, they said they are now more morose, more sad, more prone to worrying. And together, next slide, please. Together with the Juvenile Justice Welfare Council, this is in Filipino, but basically they conducted a survey with young people, with adolescents who are in Bahay Pag-asas or Houses of Hope. They the It's basically the questions were very, very simple, and it basically asked them, how are you? How are you in the middle of the pandemic? And most of them, of course, shared the same sentiments as those who are in living with their families. They are also worried about their families, and that they really also feel sad and worried. They're affected whenever they see the news that a lot of people are dying, and they too are very much concerned about their education because the alternative learning system that they are enrolled to has been discontinued because the tutors and the volunteers who come and teach them have stopped coming. And I included this slide because it's important to hear other voices, not just those who live with families, but let us remember that there are children and teenagers and adolescents and youth who are still in institutions, not just with, for example, a juvenile justice detention center, but also in other institutions such as orphanages. And they have to be heard too. They have to be, they have their mental health and their health practically during the pandemic has to be given importance as much as everybody else. And sometimes we forget them. Uh, Another thing is that for violence against children, it has increased and the vulnerabilities has increased. In quote unquote normal times, pre-COVID, the National Baseline Study on Violence Against Children that the Council for the Welfare of Children, UNICEF, UP, Manila, and Consuelo Foundation uh, all work together to conduct this baseline study on violence against children. What is the prevalence of violence in the Philippines? Because we often heard of reports. We know that reports are not as high as we think so, because a lot of incidents go unreported. The results say that pre-COVID, 80% of children and young people aged 13 to 24 years old experience any form of violence in all settings. So what do we mean with all settings? It's the home, it's the school, it's the community. And because they are teenagers and adolescents, it included dating. Just an overview of the results. 3 in 5 Filipino children and youth experience physical and psychological violence in any setting. And this is the prevalence is higher, or the risk is higher when it comes to LGBT children. We asked the respondents to self-identify, and the results showed that they are more vulnerable to any kind of violence. For sexual violence, 1 in 5 Filipino children experience any form of violence. And all throughout, it's males who are higher than females. And that broke the expectations that some of us have, that yes, what we do not say that girls are less vulnerable. We say that boys are as vulnerable as girls. The thing is, culturally, the Filipinos have often placed more safeguarding, more protective measures to girl children than boy children. And this time, we call that all at all levels, we must protect children, both boys and girls, are as both are more vulnerable, are as vulnerable to violence against children, any form of violence against children. You can Google the National Baseline Study on Violence Against Children, Philippines, and to get more information on this, because this is a whole different presentation. So, on violence against children during ECQ, the Council for the Welfare of Children stressed that there are 4 risks during lockdowns. And this is, of course, violence against children, the possibility of the virus spreading in detention centers and residential care institutions, checkpoint issues. I know you saw the news. A lot of teenagers have been victims of violence, different forms of violence, because they were caught violating curfew. And of course, online sexual abuse and exploitation. For incidents and reports during the quarantine, we see that based on WCPD's reports, there are nearly 3,700 cases of violence against women and children, and 1,754 cases are violence against children. So also, we see an increase of the incidence of child sexual abuse materials online during quarantine, 260% increase based on DOJ, where children should be safe at home, suddenly they are not. And then what we would like to show you too is that even if the incidence and risk during quarantine is high, the reports of help-seeking behavior are low. Next, please. Next slide, please. I hope you are at the slide of the breakdown of reported cases on violence against women and children per month. I hope you're there. So if we look at the data, we see that it declined from January. So the reports, the people seeking help to WCPUs, these are one-stop shop, women and children protection units. There are 23 nationwide, and they are situated usually in hospitals, government hospitals, regional hospitals, or local government. And it has gone low, and I'm sure by May it has gone lower. Considering all of these, we need different kinds of interventions. Next slide, please. And then next slide. So first, of course, is there should be programming for government and NGOs around preventing and responding to violence against children. And this, of course, is the first thing that we need to program around is stronger advocacy. Increasing access to services, as the data from our WCPU show that help-seeking behavior access to child protection services has gone really low. We need to continue implementing existing child protection laws, such as how to handle children when they violate curfew. We have a laws on that. We have the Juvenile Justice Welfare Act. And then we need to continue consulting children and the youth. Again, let us listen to what young people have to say. Next slide, please. So for programming for government and NGOs, there are recommendations from young people. Basically, what they're saying is that you have to work at the local level so that they can be reached. When you talk about rapid assessment and data gathering, you have to do it at the local government level with the local government. When you talk about effective activities and programs, in work with the SK. We need to ensure that youth-centric and youth-friendly activities are, are, are included in official guidelines and press releases. We need to strengthen mental health, child protection, adolescent, sexual, and reproductive health services, the delivery system. We have to strengthen them and make them more accessible. We need to adapt them to the current context. And this is a challenge to everybody, LGU, government, NGOs. And consider how the pandemic impacts the financial and economic aspect for the youth. We need a better research on that, and then invest in conducting online and offline engagement activities. So it's not just about reaching kids online, but also offline activities. Now, how do you do that? That's a challenge that we are trying to work out with government and NGO partners. Observe context-based culturally sensitive solutions at, again, the LGU level. Establish peer support groups and strengthen access to online community engagement. How do you do this in the time of the pandemic? Yes, we are working with youth groups, we are working with government and NGOs again on how to do this. It's all work in progress. I'll tell you more later. And another thing that we need to work with are the parents. I'm sure there are a number of parents here right now. Parents need to actively learn positive parenting, especially in this time. We have conducted a number of seminars and webinars and online workshops, and one of the things that really come up often is, how do we deal with kids? How do I teach them now that blended learning, online blended learning will be the norm? So generally reach out to your children, to NGOs and government, and ask for help for parenting programs, and reach out to other parents and form support groups and do research. There's a website that I will be promoting. These contain a number of tips about how to talk to children, how to deal with behavioral issues, how to deal with yourself as a parent, and the stresses that you feel in www.covid19parenting.com. There are Filipino and English versions in Cebuano and Hiligaynon in that website for us. Other languages in the Philippines are in development. But most of one of the most common things that parents ask me in different webinars is that, naloloko ka na ba sa bahay? Dahil sa bata. Naloloka na ako sa bahay. I'm going crazy at home because of my kids. So this is one of the things that you will find in COVID19parenting.com, how to take a step back, take a deep breath and relax. Sometimes if you want to feel like you want to shout at your children, you have to give yourself a moment. You have to take moments. Inhale, exhale, and then when you feel calm, then you attend to their needs, then you attend to your children. That parenting during COVID is a whole other webinar, which is actually, we are conducting one with DSWD and the Philippine Red Cross. It is ongoing. I think the last one was conducted this morning. And then, and of course, let us end with the youth. The youth need to be engaged. They repeatedly said so, that they want to act, they want to help, they want to be involved. Generally, young people talk to your parents, be open, keep in touch with your friends. Your report says that 50% of adolescents and young people expressed that they receive support through Facebook and other platforms. So continue learning, continue studying, continue reading. If you don't have access to the internet, continue reading and be an advocate. And for UNICEF, currently we have a platform on TikTok Tala-arawan. It's one way of sharing to other young people what you have been doing to cope positively with the effects of the pandemic. And then next slide, please. Youth engagement. We have this one is by the Positive Youth Development Network, the PYDN, the Council for the Welfare of Children, and the National Youth Commission. This is ongoing, and it's you can search this online, and it seeks to promote holistic well-being of youth and of children and youth in the time of crisis. It's a peer support group that you can join, and you can call. Google it or it's on Facebook, so you can also search for it on Facebook. House Matapang, the House of the Brave. And just to underscore, your report also underscores the need to find hope. That's why connecting with other young people also helps. Connect with your family, connect with your faith, connect with your friends, and help each other become optimistic that this too will pass and end. And lastly, the first two I shared are ongoing efforts. The last one will happen in July 4th. Tentatively, this is a TikTok tutorial. It's teaching adolescents to be safe online. It will be launched by saferkidsph.org. It's also an effort by UNICEF, Save the Children, and the Asia Foundation for young people to be able to protect themselves online. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening, and sorry for the technical issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Balana. There you have it, a very comprehensive discussion on how COVID-19 impacts children and youth in the Philippines. So it highlights how we have to respond to it from multiple perspectives and from multiple facets. What's interesting is that our next speaker will be discussing that particular support system that can become very effective. So I'd like to introduce to you our next speaker. But before that, I'd like to thank Ms. Balanon for her contributions to our webinar. But moving on, our next speaker is a professor at the Department of Family Life and Child Development of the College of Home Economics of the University of the Philippines, Diliman, where she was also the former department chair. She has a degree in Bachelor of Science in Family Life and Child Development and a Master in Education, major in Special Education, both from UP Diliman. She has been an educator for almost 15 years, working with children in early childhood, children with special needs, and teaching in the undergraduate and graduate levels. As a parent and educator, she has given seminars on developing children and the significance of their family life in their growing years. Her research and publication areas include play and development in the early years and inclusive early childhood education. She's currently pursuing a research for an inclusion program in their laboratory school. Ladies and gentlemen, to discuss with us the family as a haven for children, supporting their development during the pandemic, it is my honor to introduce to you Professor Josephine Louise Hamero.
Good afternoon, Dexter, and good afternoon to all the attendees. Let's begin. First slide, please. Okay. So we have job loss, pre-academic and academic needs of the children, friends and loved ones that we miss, procurement of needs, finances, work from home demands, and health and safety. The COVID-19 pandemic required families to adapt quickly to drastic changes in work and home demands. But while these concerns need to be shouldered mostly by the decision makers of the family, we must emphasize that the family is a system. It is made up of individuals who interact and affect one another. Therefore, what happens to the parents also affect the children, and vice versa. The good news is that this pandemic also offers us an opportunity to strengthen this family system so that it could support the development of every member of the family. All we need to do is to make a significant shift in our perspective. Next slide, please. Care and education during the pandemic would be very different. Schooling will be atypical for some time, and the primary caregivers, which are the parents, will share many tasks with the educators. Beyond the immediate need to secure the health and well-being of the members of the family system, concerns on the continuity of learning have been added to their burdens. Parents fear their children regressing or backsliding because they have been out of school for months. Questions such as, how will my children continue to learn? Or who will teach my children at home were raised probably by dual earning or dual career families the most. Our situation right now calls for a significant paradigm shift on the part of the family. Continuity in learning could no longer be confined to what we believe children must learn at this stage or to what the standard curriculum suggests. Next slide, please. While the whole family system adapts to a new way of life, we could perceive this pandemic as an opportunity to emphasize developing critical thinking and executive function skills in our children. These include those skills that I have conveniently categorized into similar skills in the boxes that you see in the presentation. Not only will this encourage authentic learning, but this will also reinforce the foundations for motivated lifelong learners. In the end, such skills will go beyond typical curriculum content and will serve the children better in the long run when they pursue challenging academic tasks and build a career that suits their abilities best. Focusing on long-term skills at a time when they are out of school would help reduce the anxieties of the family system and guide this unit into becoming productive in a less than ideal situation. These skills will help family members cope well to this new normal and to perform better in later academic tasks. Next slide, please. Today, my goal is to help families create a haven for their developing children, and I will show you how each domain of development, their physical, social, emotional, and cognitive development, could be supported during a pandemic from the time that the child is in the womb to their primary schooling years. Let's begin with the time that they are inside the womb, the prenatal stage of development. This stage highlights the mother and child subsystem because there can be no more intimate time for the child when they are inside their mother. This is also the beginning of their first and most genuine relationship that they are establishing with their primary caregiver. The father and mother subsystem in the family will also evolve, and this evolution will pour over their shared parenting roles. Next slide, please. For every stage, I will show you a quadrant, and this quadrant will represent the physical, emotional, social, and cognitive domains of development and how we can support them to create a haven for children at that stage of development. So for children inside the womb of their mothers, it's very important for physical development that we free the environment from any threats. Any care that we provide for the mother will be directly translated to the child who is currently developing every major organ that he has. The first trimester is the most critical for that stage. For emotional development, it's very important to have a very calm environment, and it's very difficult during a pandemic to have this. That's why it's very important for us at this time to recognize and deal with stressors immediately, and if possible, free the mother from as much stressors as possible. For social and cognitive development, I emphasize the importance of nurturing conversations. And these are not only conversations between the mother and the child, but these will also include conversations that the child will hear from the womb, conversations with significant others. So I would encourage mothers to keep these pleasant and meaningful. Select the people that you will have conversations with and try your best to make these conversations not only pleasant for yourself, but also pleasant for your child. Next slide, please. Let's go to infancy and toddlerhood during the pandemic. At this stage, child begins to learn his value for the family. And he discovers his independence, and she also gains confidence in her abilities. Now, executive function skills, or EFS, are best supported when we help the children understand their desires and their limits. Let's go to the quadrant. A haven for infancy and toddlerhood could be created. Let's begin with physical development. Create safe spaces for independent movement and exploration. I would like to emphasize the word independent, meaning that they could move on their own, unsupported, or supported minimally by their primary caregivers. This is very important because they are beginning to understand what they can and cannot do at this time. For emotional development, I would highly recommend for parents, caregivers to slow down. And this is very difficult for us who live in a fast-paced world. But the importance of slowing down is that we allow time for the children to express themselves to us. And also, by slowing down, we give genuine attention to the children and respond emotionally to them as completely and as thoroughly as we can. For social development, I would encourage parents to be present during their play. And playtime is not very easy for parents who are growing much older during this time, but it's very important for us to play with our children because this is the time that we could value communicating with them. And communication for infancy and toddlerhood doesn't have to be verbal. Communication could be a nonverbal exchange, looking at each other, being beside each other, hugging and cuddling. Those are communications between the caregiver and the child in infancy and toddlerhood. And finally, for cognitive development, I would like to emphasize further my recommendation for physical development, which is movement and manipulation. Let us avoid putting children in baby contraptions in places where they are safe, but they could not move at all. Allow them as much space in the house as possible to move, to explore, to manipulate, to touch objects that you have at home. And these objects do not have to be anything special. They could be as simple as a strainer or a colander or a wooden spoon, and they would be very happy to explore that material already. Now, let me show you some pictures that I've taken during the pandemic. Next slide, please. These are some photos of my infant. Oh, now she's a toddler. And these are the things that we did during the pandemic or during the quarantine. Allow your child to contribute during story time. And sometimes that means going at the middle of the book first or the end of the book first, and you mix up the stories. But by allowing them to contribute, you are telling them that what you have to say and your thoughts are important. And that is very critical for infancy and toddlerhood. On the second picture, you will see that I also tried to vary my presentation of routines. We have almost the same routines every day, but on special occasions or on days that we find a little bit more boring than usual, we try to vary the presentation of their routines. So in this particular picture, this was her first birthday, and we did a campsite using boxes that they colored and a blanket that we hung from the corners of the room, and we presented dinner to her in this way. And finally, on the last picture, you will see that she's quite fortunate because she has a play partner at home. And this is very important for children because play partners, apart from the caregivers or children who are around the same age, could be people that they will learn from. This is also important for their cognitive development. Let's go to early childhood during the pandemic. So for early childhood, they have already been in school, and they are asking, who am I to the people outside of my family? Who am I to my teachers? Who am I to my friends? And our responsiveness as caregivers to our preschoolers is very rewarding. It rewards their curiosity and it encourages them to pursue their interests. At this stage, the early childhood stage, ages 3 to 5, executive function skills develop most rapidly. So this is one of the most important stages for executive functions. And therefore, we will be able to support them only by providing excellent care relations and safe venues to explore in order for us to create motivated learners. Let's go to the quadrant for creating a haven for early childhood. For physical development, this is the perfect time for you to introduce nutrition concepts for your children. Why are we serving these kinds of food to you? What do you get from these foods? There are some foods that you don't like. Let's find the ones that you like. And this will help them understand that taking care of their body is very important during this time. For emotional development, it can be very frustrating for children to be stuck in the home with playmates that are mostly adults. So allow them to express their overwhelming feelings. Allow them to shout sometimes if necessary. Allow them to express their frustrations physically whenever possible. And then address the situation carefully with them. Be open and be their safe space. For social development, make time to reach out to significant others. And when you do so, include your children in the conversations. Oh, you say hi to your say hi to your lolo and lola. Say hi to your tita. Say hi to our friends outside of the family so that they will remember that even though they are at home, we continue to build relationships with other people outside of the family. And finally, for cognitive development, allow them to ask questions and ask questions yourself. This will allow them to have conversations that focus on critical thinking. And as primary caregivers, we will be able to understand how our children are seeing this whole situation, this quarantine. What do you think of being at home? Why are we at home? I'll show you some pictures from our home time during the quarantine. So the first picture shows that my son wrote some numbers, and he said that the reason why he wrote some numbers and drew some people is to represent what the news says about counting the virus. Because once the virus are gone, then we can go outside. So this is his way of saying, this is how I understand the situation. On the second picture, you see how what I mean when I say allow for multiple forms of expression. This is not for the faint of heart, and I'm not telling all the parents to allow your children to write on your walls. But as you can see behind me, all our walls and all our floors and all our surfaces here in the home are welcome to their expression. So that's not for all families. So find something that is comfortable for you. And on the last picture, you will see that it is also possible to make plans with children during their early childhood years. What will we do after this pandemic? And that is a source of excitement and optimism for them. Now let's go to the middle childhood stage. For the middle childhood stage, they have already grown their world outside, and now they are stuck at home and their friends are very much inaccessible to them. Also, they have academic tasks that they need to balance with other skills at home, such as developing their executive function skills. Now, how could your children grow in relationship with others, and how we as parents could continue to motivate them to learn? Now, let's look at the quadrant. Okay, the quadrant says for physical development, they really need very, very active engagements, but that is not very much possible during this time. So encourage them to create their own active tasks or to engage in as much outdoor time as possible. If it has to be your garage only or your pocket garden or the balcony, allow them to do so because that is a very important space for children in their middle childhood years. For emotional development, model optimism and positive self-image. Remember that during the middle childhood years, that is the time when they are beginning to compare themselves with their peers. And if you, as a primary caregiver, is a model of optimism and a positive self-image, then when they compare themselves to their peers, they will be able to say, oh, this is okay because I am happy about myself. That is very important for them. Let's go to social development, and it says, as parents, we need to create safe venues and rules to interact with peers. They need to be able to grow into a relationship with their peers, but we must set limits. And I think social media is a very questionable platform for this particular stage of development because although there are limits for it, we are not in total control of what they can access in these platforms. But on the other hand, we need to also respect that children have their own culture. We need to understand that there are some things that we can interfere on as caregivers, like setting rules, which is acceptable to us and which are not. And then we must set limits, but then there are areas that we cannot interfere with. We cannot judge their friends, or we cannot offer our opinions at certain times. And this is very important for children during their primary schooling years. Finally, for cognitive development, I would highly recommend emphasizing developing long-term skills such as executive function skills more than mere completion of academic tasks. So a lot of parents are worried about regression and backsliding or being at a disadvantage later on, but most definitely skills like the EFS are very important skills even when they are already developing their career. So I wouldn't say that this is something worth worrying about. Last slide, please. We need to remember that every atypical situation has its own polarities. On the one hand, we could find it difficult to balance demands of work and home. We might have less intimate social interactions than what we need, and we have far less space for active engagements while in quarantine. But on the other hand, the family system could also refocus its attention to developing skills that benefit long-term goals. We could create more opportunities for intimate family interactions, and we can even have time to enhance creative activity spaces within our home. If we focus on developing within our existing context, we will be able to adapt better, and the process towards our goals will flow more naturally. There would be little need to construct special activities for your children because children could now be engaged in authentic events. Ask them about this pandemic. Help them understand why we are on quarantine. The paradigm could now be about turning the family into a haven of development where knowledge is co-constructed, ideas are nurtured, and all members of the family system develop from the time that they are thriving from each other's company. Let children contribute to the haven you are building. This way, they can develop the skills that they need to function successfully today and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hamera, for that very comprehensive discussion. We were actually brought through the entirety of the stages of child development, and that's very prime for us, especially in terms of understanding COVID-19. Thank you for that. Again, reminding everyone, if you have questions, you may use our chat function, our question and answer panel in the Zoom platform, and we'll be answering them later this afternoon. Now let's move on to our next speaker. If we've now seen the development of the children, perhaps let's look into how they stay safe online. And that's definitely going to be the topic of our next speaker. Our next speaker is actually a child and youth advocate. He has been leading various children and youth development programs and advocacies and has been handling leadership, journalism, and sports for development programs. He is currently an advocacy and training officer at Stairway Foundation, which is at the forefront of Break the Silence campaign, a multifaceted approach in the fight against child sexual abuse and exploitation on both online and offline environment. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce to you our next speaker to discuss about being cyber safe, creating a safe online environment for children. From Stairway Foundation, Mr. John Michael Matibag.
Thank you so much, sir. Makabatang araw, everyone, and thank you for inviting us on this online discussion. And we will be exploring the Be Cyber Safe and ways on how to create a safe online environment for our children. So we have two main objectives in the next 15 minutes. One is to know the harms and the risks children might face while they are in the internet. And number two is to develop necessary knowledge and attitude towards cyber safety of children. So how do we describe the internet and online world today? So it is a virtual world wherein children uses technology in a risky manner. And it is also a virtual world wherein technology is used to abuse and exploit children. And it also a virtual world wherein adults and children are using the same technology or sharing the same technology, but culturally we are detached. So what separates adult from children and the technology? And as we all know, we are divided into several generations, but sometimes these generations have different perspectives, especially on the internet or the online world. and this creates digital divide. And children are growing up with the technology, but the question is, can we adults catch up or at least understand the fast-paced development of the technology? So although information and communication technology and the internet provides opportunity to promote children, the medium has also amplified child online protection concern. Next slide, please. Here are some of the news clips within the last 90 days or 3 months of being quarantined due to COVID-19 pandemic. So increase on reports on online sexual abuse and exploitation here in the Philippines became a pressing concern since children are now with their home and they are with their family and their guardians. Next slide, please. In 2016, National Baseline Study on Violence Against Children conducted by the Council for the Welfare of Children, the UNICEF, and other organizations, they found out that about 43% of children, or 1 out of 2 Filipino children aged 13 to 18 years, experience cyber violence. 1/3 of it are in form of verbal abuse over the internet. 1/4 have sent and received sexual messages, and about 2.5% had self-generated sexual content shown on the internet on their social media accounts and or on their cell phones. An earlier study or survey conducted by the Stairway Foundation in 2015 found out that 5 out of 10 Filipino children aged 7 to 16 years old stated that no one has talked to them about cyber safety. So that's why it's really important for us to educate children on how to have a safe online environment and about cyber safety. Generally, we may enjoy, previous slide, please. Generally, we may enjoy the internet and our interaction on social media, but we also need to know what are the things that might impose us risks and harm on the internet. And here, Stairway Foundation, we look at these harms and risks on the 3Cs framework. So this 3Cs framework is a simple way of trying to understand the different risks children might encounter online. Next slide, please. So when discussing the 3C, we will now going to the first C or the first risk, which is the content risk. These are what children see online, which are abusive and harmful in nature. So this pertains to the content itself, such as the photos, videos, audios, text, and other online contents. And one harmful content risk on online is the online pornography. Next slide, please. So what's the danger when a children sees adult pornography? And what's the difference if the child is exposed to child pornography? So with this, we have 2 types of pornography. The first one is the adult pornography, and the second one is the child pornography. So children being exposed to adult pornography is both harmful and illegal. It is illegal because it is not age appropriate and it potentially projects inappropriate different value system for children. And it is also illegal based on the Republic Act 7610. Child pornography, on the other hand, is dangerous because it potentially normalizes the abusive behavior amongst children. Children who get exposed to child pornography might mimic the content since those depicted are also children. And the materials itself is a recorded of abuse of children, which is illegal based on the Republic Act 9775 or the Anti-Child Pornography Act of 2009. But in 2 of our surveys in 2012 and 2015, it shows that children have seen online pornography on the internet. In 2015, 6 out of 10 Filipino children aged 7 to 16 have seen pornographic links on the social media. So there's a difference between 2012 and 2015 because in 2015, they are now accessing and seeing pornographic links through social media. So now, children might be exposed to child pornography through social media news feeds, pages, status updates, public and closed groups, and even in private messages. So since the content is on social media, we will now explore who are the potential contact within the social media and or in the internet. So we will be going to the next risk, which is the contact risks. Next slide, please. So these are the people who children interacts with online. And now, um, on content risk, children are the recipient. During the contact risk, children are now active participants on the online interaction. So children may be a potential target on online grooming. It is a process of when an adult targets a child and initially gains their trust and eventually asking for sexual favors. They usually started with safe interactions before proceeding to sexualize conversations to normalize the act or the conversation. Aside from this, they may also be a potential victim of sextortion. It is a practice of extorting money and sexual favors for someone by threatening to expose non-consensual naked images of the victims. So, aside from sexual interactions, other harmful forms of contact risks may include interactions when the interaction is violent in nature and when the interaction is neither violent or sexual, but the child feels uncomfortable about the interaction. Next slide, please. So another contact risk is the live streaming abuse. So before, it takes effort and time for the sex offender or the consumer to contact the victim directly. It can be a hit or miss for them. So they resorted to hiring facilitators to contact children and facilitate the sexual act. This is also similar with the early times of the syndicates. What's alarming is that today, perpetrators and facilitators are being member of the community, and some of them are even members of the family and relatives to the child victim, or even some of them are the second generation victim or those who were former victims and was not rescued and became perpetrators themselves. That's why it's important to report cases like this to break the cycle of violence. So aside from content and contact on online interaction, we also have the third C on the framework, which is the conduct risks. Next slide po. So conduct risks, these are children's risky behavior online. So usually happening amongst teenager. And this is a combination of natural development traits of the child or the teens and the absence of child online protection guidance. One of the example of the conduct risk is the sexting. In our 2012 Stairway Online Safety Study, 7% in age group 10 to 17 have engaged in sexting. So sometimes children do not have the idea or do not know the how to categorize personal information. So they resorted to sharing sensitive and private information. So here are some of the examples. When a child takes a naked photo of him or herself and then send it to his or her boyfriend or girlfriend. When a child takes one but uploaded it on her social media profile or account with an only me privacy on the photo album, and when the child takes one but didn't send it to anyone else or upload it to any social media account, but only save it to on his phone. So what they do not know is that once they digitally recorded images of private body parts, it is already out of their control. Whether they share it, they upload it privately, or just save it on their phone. Next slide, please. So to sum it up, the 3Cs framework, children's online exposure to sexualized and violent contents are the content risks. The people interacting with children are the contact risks, and children producing their own pornographic and violent materials as a result to exposure to content and online interactions are the conduct risks. Next slide po. And these 3Cs interacts with each other and form another kind or other kinds of online risk for children. Here are some of the example. We can see online that children were participating on the Invisible TikTok challenge. And then on online gaming addiction, children plays or digital games excessively, neglecting other aspects of their life like eating properly or eating at time, studying, and doing household household chores, or even playing physically with some of their friends. And we also need to teach children about online friending, so that not all strangers have bad intentions and not all friends have good intentions. This is That's why it's really important to be sure that you feel safe regardless of who you are contacting with, or um, even if they are your online friend, acquaintances, or online strangers. And the last one is the cyberbullying, a form of bullying done using the technology and the internet. There are a lot of other risks that may impose harms and risks for children that was not mentioned on this slide or on this presentation. So it's really important for us to know how to create a safe online environment for children. So what do we need to teach to our children is that, one, the online and offline consequences. That, remember, whatever we do online do have an offline consequences. Number two, the misconception on no touch and no harm. And just because there is no physical contact between the child and the offender, it doesn't mean that the child do not suffer from a significant harm. So this is a misconception when it comes to child online exploitation abuse, because there is always an abusive touching involved during those live streaming apps. The third one is the absence of the concept of internet permanence, that once the material is uploaded, live streamed, or recorded online, it will be forever there is forever on the internet or online, and children suffers from the victimization every time these materials comes up and went viral. So we also need to teach them who are the people they might encounter online. So we categorize them on three different kinds of people or friends. The first one is the online friend. These are people you interact with online, and you also know them personally, whether it's offline or online. We also have the online acquaintances. These are confirmed as a real person by some of your online friends, but you haven't met them personally and you are not really close to them. So there are somewhat common friend or circle on the other circle of friend. And the last one is the most important that we need to teach to our children is the concept of online strangers. So online strangers are someone you encounter online and you do not know personally, you do not see them personally, and you do not meet them personally. The way we treat acquaintances and strangers offline should also be the way we treat them online. Next slide. So we may also look at this guide whenever we got confused on sharing our personal information. Children are sometimes having hard time on pertaining personal information and classifying this kind of personal information. So what we did is that we classified them also into three classifications, but personal information is an information about ourselves. So the first classification is the public personal information. These are something you can share to the public because it is safe to do so, like sharing your nickname, your favorite book, your celebrity idol. And even if the public knows this information, there are no safety related consequences to you. The next one is the sensitive personal information. So these are something that you can only share to some of your trusted person or people because it might be risky to divulge it to the public, like your mobile number, your home address, or your current location. And the last classification is the private personal information. So these are the information that you should not share to anyone because it is unsafe to do. So I repeat, you should not share this because it is unsafe to do. Having others access to this information might put you into risk or harm. And to remember, do not share your social media password even to your closest friend, family members, partners, girlfriend or boyfriend, and of course, do not share or take images of your private body parts. Next slide, please. We also need to teach our children on how to recognize online red flag. If the child feels uncomfortable about um, because of something the child saw, heard, read online, or just because of an online interaction, then this can be considered a potential red flag. Knowing what are the early warning signs of potential online harm is an essential life skills for our children to acquire. And early warning signs on risky behaviors may lead to feeling of discomfort, unease, and doubt for our children. If it involves private body parts, such as someone asks you to show your private body parts or showing his or her private body parts, then it is definitely an online red flag. If you do encounter such online red flag, teach our children to stop the online interaction and tell it to a trusted adult about the experiences. So children should be able to identify who their trusted adults are. Next slide, please. So trusted adults are those who you can talk to if you have a problem. And these are trusted adults can be found at your home, at your neighborhood, or in school, or even in the community. And next slide po. To end my presentation, we may also teach our children these online safety rules. One, it is never all right for anyone over the internet to ask you to show your private body parts, or a person, his or her, and other person's private body parts through chat sessions or social networking sites. Number two, if you do not feel comfortable about the experiences or online interaction, you have the right to say no to such encounters. Three, never post sensitive and private information that people should not see because it might lead to harm and risk to you. Never do meetups. And lastly, it is never your fault if you experience confusing and unsafe online experiences, and never keep secrets about breaking the online safety rules. So online safety is not about, or it's not just about talking about with the technology, it also behavior change. To conclude, the internet should be a safe space for our children to use as for opportunity. And it also should be a safe space where children's rights are protected and promoted. So everyone, let's create a safe online environment for our children. Be cyber safe. Thank you po. If you have, if you want to check our resources, next slide please. If you want to check our resources, our e-learning, and some of our social media cards, you can check out on these social media links. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matibag, for the very comprehensive discussion on cybersecurity for our children. As we continue to engage in online learning and all of these online activities, our children and youth continue to be at risk. And along with that would be a very high risk for stress related to these things, among other things. And that will definitely need us to develop better coping mechanisms in terms of taking care of our mental well-being. With that said, I'm very excited to introduce to you our last speaker for today. She is an associate professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Medicine of the University of the Philippines College of Medicine and Philippine General Hospital. She has over 20 years of clinical experiences in the field and expertise in general adult psychiatry, and has been involved in various mental health advocacies, projects, and services. Currently, she also serves as the principal investigator of the National Survey for Mental Health and Well-being, a first epidemiological baseline survey to provide both national and regional estimates on the prevalence of physical, behavioral, and mental health problems in the Philippines under the research program of the Philippine Council for Health and Research Development and the National Center for Mental Health of the Department of Health. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce to you our next speaker to discuss maintaining mental wellness in the new normal, Dr. Maria Lourdes Rosana de Guzman.
please. There. Am I online? And hello? Yes. Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this webinar. And it's a venue for everybody to get to know how to protect and maintain young people's physical and mental health. And I'd also like to laud the three very good and comprehensive even tips on how to take care of our children. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you now is how to approach mental wellness in the new normal. The ongoing COVID-19 disease spread is really a public health emergency and has global threats. No, although in spite of the challenges that we face, we have been, the guarantee it is that it has kept many of us safe and healthy, no, in spite of this. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so if you're going to look at, next slide, yeah, can I have the next slide, please? Yes, that's right. So after the March lockdown of the country with the ECQ, with the hope to flatten the curve, everyone had to cope with unfamiliar surroundings, the health concerns, social distancing, all these things that we hear, work from home, school closure, was this homeschooling, unemployment for some, and it really has affected even as had been mentioned earlier, the family financial income. And it has also, whatever projects, plans, or travel activities that we have had suddenly been halted. That's why we have to come up with new ways, explore new ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic might adjust, shape, or render our lives across multiple dimensions. Next slide. So what we're going to bring up, what I'm going to bring up this afternoon is how to place this within the new normal, no? As if that is the definition of what the new normal is, no? Because the new normal is merging behavior, situations, minimum health centers that will be institutionalized in common and routine practices and remain even after the pandemic while the disease is not totally eradicated. So it simply implies that it's something which was previously abnormal has now become commonplace. And this is what we are faced now. Next slide. Okay, so what awaits us after the quarantine? There's social isolation, there's less physically activity. This is maybe a summary of what you've heard this afternoon with the three speakers ahead. There's less physically active, children become less physically active. There's more screen time, irregular sleeping patterns, I'm sure, because if they spend so much time on screen time and on video games, no, they consume more unhealthy foods, no interaction with friends, maybe even poor academic achievements, boredom. That's something that parents have to deal with, and the lack of personal space because everybody's at home. Okay, next slide. Okay. So we also have, they have to institute new behaviors, no? We know this very well, that children, we've always reminded the children, and the adults, continue washing your hands properly to stay free from the virus, and then to always carry hand sanitizers around to ensure your safety outside. They have to also wear masks all throughout, no? And sometimes they're even prevented from going out to play because they're going to catch the virus. Next slide. So, because of this, if you're going to summarize everything, all these are external stressors. This long isolation duration, there's decrease in physical activity, there's a lot of fear and anxiety of infection. No? They might contract the virus, and it's something that's embedded in them by their parents and caregivers. There are a lot of unpredictable events, even for us as well. We don't know it's going to be GCQ or ECQ, no? And it has also disrupted social relationship. Just imagine, no, to be completely cut off from school, from their friends, the lack of personal space at home, and they have also feel the family financial losses. Next slide. So just to show you some researches that I'd like to present to you, this is the impact of COVID pandemic on children and adolescent lifestyle behavior larger than expected. If you look at it, no, there's significantly reduced physical activity and increased sedentary life. If you look at the table, from 540 minutes, physical activity has been reduced to 105 minutes, no, and that's a significant decrease, no. And then in terms of being inactive, insufficient physical activity, and then and very less of sufficient activity. In fact, it's very negative. Total screen time, this is the sedentary lifestyle, not the time that they spend on the internet, video games, talking or watching television, okay, it has significantly increased, no? From a screen time of 170 minutes, no? They have increased to 450 minutes, no? So what do you see there? This is linked to both negative physical and mental health outcomes. There's loss of muscular and cardiorespiratory fitness, there's weight gain, there's a lot of psychosocial problems, the poor academic achievements, and in fact, this can carry on to come up with a negative impact that can extend to childhood. Next slide. So in that article, they've summarized that physical activity, remember, is protective of contracting the virus in a very vulnerable population. Another study also showed that the mean post-traumatic stress disorder scores of children experiencing quarantine were 4 times higher versus children who are not on quarantine. Next slide. Okay, so how can we help children and adolescents cope with the stress of post-COVID-19? And I'd like to offer some very practical tips for parents and caregivers, and also for the teens who are watching this right now. Next slide. So we'd like to focus on 3 areas. Next slide. Okay, social support is very important. It's very important. Sorry, can you go back? I just go back to the previous slide, please. Yes, previous slide. Yes, okay. So what are the strategies for coping? I'd like to lump it into 3 major areas. Social support, the need to keep informed, no, and to avoid misinformation, because of course whatever the adults hear, whatever the parents and caregivers hear are mimicked by children, and also the need to form healthy habits in children and adolescents. This is the best time to do it now, because behavior is something that has to be repetitive. The things that you learned when you were young as a child, if you're sometimes your mother keeps on repeating and repeating the same things, but this is something that you will carry with you throughout your entire life. Next slide. Okay, so here, seek information, the next slide, from trusted sources. And it's good to explain to the children why we need to wear masks, why we need to wash our hands, why we need to keep social distancing, no? And that's completely different from emotional distancing, okay? And why we need to bring alcohol if we are not able to do hand washing, okay? So provide information from trusted sources. In that way, it takes away their anxiety and fear, because they know the reasons behind the reasons behind why they do the things they do. Next slide. Okay. Can I have the next slide, please? Yes. Okay, so here, very important social support for children and adolescents. No? Aside from emotional support, they need to feel that they are needed at home. No? And sometimes they feel that they're a burden at home because their parents have to come up with activities. On the contrary, they should feel needed at home by giving them responsibilities. No? And that they can be counted on for reliable support, for assistance. You will need to provide advice and information, reassurances of their self-worth, that they're able to do good things, and you'll be able to provide and support for their needs. Okay, so we're going to go through each one by one. Okay, next slide. Okay, the thing that we have to keep in mind is we need to be creative about our social support system. Okay, because there are many. I think from what has been said, we are faced with the dangers of pornography, of cyberbullying. You know, of what's this? Being what's this? Not being able to discern the right online friends, no, and acquaintances and online strangers. So we need to provide a safe and protective environment for them at home. So that's the reason why we have to be creative about what we do with our kids together. Next slide. And here in the next slide, I'm going to give you some ideas. First, you've got to believe in your values, in our values of strength and resilience. That we can do these things together. No, okay. We have to develop on routine activities with our children and try to do physical activities with them, and teach them learning life skills, survival skills by getting them engaged in household chores. Can I have the next slide? Okay, maintain physical and psychological well-being can be done with expressing love and care, reassuring each other that their needs will be met. Be very sensitive to family members who may be worried and fearful, and you need to organize your home, maybe with them, for them to feel more comfortable and relaxed. And here also, the parents have to be on top of it to avoid conflicts and argument at this time. Next slide, because everything can be talked. I mean, dialogue is very important. Have an emergency plan, no? And know your community resources. In this way, you can connect with the community, be aware of social media distancing, offer information that are helpful and useful, and be able to cooperate with measures for the benefit of the greater good. No? The idea is that we all need to make personal adjustments so that we ensure public safety. So this is going on a bigger perspective. Next slide. Okay, then for yourself, as parents, caregivers, and teeners, stay calm and reassure the others. Share their concerns and talk to them. Listen to them, talk to them while they can still listen to you. Answer every question and share facts. And stay confident that you can deal with the problems as they arise. Okay, next slide. Okay, then as has been mentioned before, we need to practice good social media hygiene and teach children to have control over their social media. No, take a break from alarming feeds that you think may make it worse for them. Next slide. Then important is the other thing also, this one on the physical, behavioral level, let's form healthy habits and healthy living. In that way, we increase immunity and provide for physical and mental resiliency. Next slide. Next slide. Yes. Oh, I think it's a pity I've run out of time for it. But anyway, I'm willing to share everybody. The important thing with healthy habits is that we have to have a healthy diet, following a food pyramid that parents and caregivers can be on top of. And then I think I included in the next slide the importance of exercise and play. If you can run through the slides, then I think then we'll be able to finish everything. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, display and exercise and sleep is very important. Please monitor the sleep of your children. And there are other coping strategies. No? And the last one is to use humor. I'm sure some of you are watching TV with your kids, but explain things to them and make them understand the reasons of why it helps them to control and to be able to discern what they watch. And then it would be good to refer. Next slide, the last slide. Yeah. Yeah, I have just two last slides, no? I have 1 minute left, but if you can turn the slide faster, it will be easier for me to talk about it. Yeah, the last slide. Okay, maybe it's not possible anymore because time is up. But the most important thing, any common behavioral problems in children, then you should know when to refer. No, in that without labeling, just identify the problems, the behaviors in children, and then refer as necessary. So thank you very much. I mean, it's been. I hope I've been able to contribute in a significant way some ideas for parents and caregivers. Okay, in providing for mental wellness for children and adolescents. Thank you.
Thank you
Okay,
very
that's it.
much, Dr. De Guzman, for a very comprehensive
Thank you
talk
very
on
much.
mental health and well-being for our children and youth. Rest assured, for those who are not able to see all of Doc's slides, we will be providing the presentations of all our speakers to all of those who registered via email. So now we move on to the much awaited question and answer portion of our discussion today. And to start, this question is from Miss Maria Shirley's Sevedo, and this is for Miss Balanon. Her question focuses on this concern. What are the other actions to address the other side of the youth, particularly those who do not have internet access or devices for their own personal learnings? They may also be in danger. How do you respond to this, Miss Balanon?
Hello, hi. Uh, what I shared were online platforms. What we are also doing are offline, low tech options. We are developing comics for children and young people and teenagers on violence against children. Basically, stories about experiencing violence and who to run to, who you can talk to, where you can go for support. And then we are trying to develop with Valenzuela City, the LGU, on exploring how to do it in the context of the new normal. Because as one of the speakers said, we still don't know what the rules will be in the GCQ in the future. So depends on how to do that offline. But what we can do offline without contacts, as young people and children still cannot go out of their homes based on IATF rules, uh, reading materials is what we try to promote. These are, of course, through DSWD, CWC, and soon we are developing things too with DepEd and juvenile justice for the welfare of children. So we are trying to reach both, but it's been challenging, and a lot of it is still in the development phase with LGUs, with NGOs, and of course with the young people, so we can figure out how to engage more young people both online and offline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Balanan. Very comprehensive response. I'd now like to direct the question to our speaker discussing childhood development. No? Particularly, this is a combined question from Mr. Mark Nelvinus and Israel Deloy. The question is, how do we facilitate movement and manipulation for infants and toddlers in housing with limited space, uh, particularly those in the informal setting, no? Particularly in the urban poor communities? And in this scenario, what would be the best parenting style during the pandemic? I think the best person to answer that would be Professor Josephine Hamera.
Yes, thank you, Dexter. So for this kind of setting, maraming meron sa ating problems sa small spaces or limited spaces for the movement of children. And I agree that this is very difficult, not only for infancy and toddlerhood, but until the middle childhood years. I think one of the things that I learned more recently is that your floor is actually the best place for children. Floor and no cribs, no contractions, no special fences or anything like that. just make the floor safe, free from outlets, power outlets, or something that they could reach that is dangerous for them. And just by allowing them this floor space, you are allowing them to move. And as for manipulation, I would say that the most interesting materials for children that are within your house are actually kitchen materials. And my children really like materials like I have access to their kitchen right now. So uh, bowls, plastic bowls, wooden bowls. What else? They also like uh, they do have some pretend play materials like pretend food, pretend toys. But actually, this is more interesting. Bottles, plastic bottles, caps, ano pa ba? Anything, boxes, and those are usually free. So when we get boxes, for example, when we go to the grocery, we disinfect the boxes as much as we could, and then we allow them to color on it, to go inside it. So boxes and floor and kitchen equipment are the best materials, and you do not need to buy them at all. So they're almost completely free, and they're the best creative play materials for even for infants and toddlers. Infants are really enjoy boxes and floor space, free floor space for movement. So kahit gaano kaliit yung space mo, basta may sahig, basta kaya mong maging safe yung floor para sa bata, walang nakakatusok, walang babasagin, walang lugar na makukuryente sila, yun yung pinaka okay para sa movement and manipulation.
Thank you, Professor Hamera, for your response. Now we have a question for Mr. Matibag. So the question is from an anonymous participant in our webinar. The question is, do you think DepEd's curriculum substantially addresses the cyber risk issues in terms of raising awareness? If not, tends to be integrated in schools or by schools. So what are your thoughts, sir?
I think DepEd is doing their job on creating a safe online environment for our children. And we are also working with DepEd on providing some safety lessons. And we are actually partnering with Department of Education. And there are some in the pipelines that can help our children in the next coming academic year on including these lessons on cyber safety with our DepEd, or in the upcoming academic year.
Much, Mr. Matibag. So now we have a question for Dr. De Guzman. So this one is highlighting this particular issue. What are the behaviors to watch out for regarding red flags in terms of children's mental health, especially when there seems to be a change in their behavior? What would be these things to watch out for as parents or as guardians to watch out for in times like these, the pandemic? Dr. De Guzman? All right. I think we are unable to hear Dr. De Guzman. Perhaps we can look into another question. Okay, so this is a question, and I believe this is open for everyone. I'd like to ask this question. This is from one of our organizers, actually, Ms. Maria Christine Sanchez. She'll like to seek advice for caregivers of special children or children with disabilities in the time of COVID-19. Is there any insight regarding how particular caregivers can approach those with special needs at this time? I believe anyone can answer. From any of our panelists today. Perhaps some thoughts from Dr. Hamero, Ms. Balana, Mr. Matibag, Dr. De Guzman.
Hi, maybe I could start. Yes, for children with disabilities, we're working basically two-pronged. One is for advocacy with the Council for the Welfare of Children. We are developing a advocacy to protect children with disabilities from violence against children. And on the parenting approach, when it comes to that, we work with Ateneo de Manila in developing the Parenting for Lifelong Health Adaptation. It's WHO's parenting program, and we adapted that to Masayang Pamilya para sa Batang Pilipino, or MAPA. We're working with the SWD on that, and a lot of the messages there on how to strengthen the relationship between the child and the parent. Basically, it still applies to CWDs. It's still basically the principles are the same. You talk to them, you be open to them, but the challenge at that is more on the part of the parent, who needs to adjust, who needs to be more sensitive to the needs of the child, who needs to be more patient as uh, learning is on a different pace. So basically, most parenting tips that we have on COVID-19parenting.com still applies. Parents just need to go an extra mile. And in engaging children with disabilities, we are also starting to work with the Council for the Welfare of Children to open up venues for them to be able to participate. Still, all of these are all a work in progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Balanan, for your insights. I'd just like to go back now to Dr. De Guzman, if she's available already, for that question on mental health, particularly the red flags. Hopefully her connection is already stable. Dr. De Guzman? All right, it looks like she still has some concerns with the connection, but I know everyone here has a lot of questions still for our panelists. Actually, our Q&A panel is filled to the brim, and hopefully you'll be able to contact our speakers individually even after this webinar through their presentations and the contact details that they'll be sharing. But with that, I think it's time for us to take a look back at what has happened in this webinar. First, we tried to get an overview of the challenges that young people and children face during the pandemic, and dived into a discussion on the family as a support system and the developments that we see as they grow up. And this led to us discussing the need to improve cybersecurity and the age of becoming more available online, especially for our children and youth. And this circles back to the need to improve mental health care for our children and youth. So once again, this has been a very exciting webinar with all of you. This has been the Young in the Face of COVID-19 Impacts on Children and Youth's Well-Being and Safety, hosted by UP Cefal and University of the Philippines. And of course, we'd like to thank our partners, 2030 Youth Force in the Philippines, Ayala Foundation, Online SDG Youth Action Forum, Philippine Youth Network, Ramon Aboites Foundation, SK Federation of Cebu City, SK Federation of Quezon City, Stairway Foundation, Student Council Alliance of the Philippines, UP Family Life and Child Development, and Youth Advocates for the Philippines. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. It looks like we can have a last catch up. I think Dr. De Guzman has already become available for the question. Just a last question. Guzman. All right. So it looks like we still cannot hear Dr. De Guzman. So with that said, thank you very much to everyone who has been a part of this discussion. So I'd just like to remind everyone to always be vigilant and to always push forward the welfare of our children and youth in the Philippines. So thank you very much for being part of this event. And we look forward to you joining us in our future webinars. Thank you very much, and may you all have a great day.
Thank you again, Dexter. That was wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.